Sometimes the best way to really understand how a system works or doesn't work isn't by reading the official rulebook. It's by looking at a single, real-life story. That's exactly what we're doing today, digging into a letter sent straight to the top of a government agency and the revealing lack of a response it got.
Everything starts with this number, 139. And I know, at first glance, it's just a number, right? But in this story, it represents the absolute core of a systemic crisis for one person, a person providing essential, round-the-clock care.
Because 139 isn't just a number of days, it's a countdown. It's the number of days a home-sharing provider delivered constant 24/7 care without getting paid a single dime, pushing them right to the edge of personal bankruptcy.
And let's be clear, this wasn't some simple billing error or a lost check in the mail. No, this was a complete breakdown in the system. A breakdown that forced a provider who is still actively caring for a vulnerable person to escalate their concerns way up the chain of command.
Just look at how this unfolds. The pressure just keeps mounting. Imagine this is you. On December 1st, 2023, your paychecks just stop. But your 24/7 job doesn't. Then January goes by, then February, then March. We're talking 4 full months. The crisis finally hits a breaking point on April 18th, 2024. That's 139 days straight of unpaid essential work. Bankruptcy isn't a threat anymore, it's a reality.
So what do? The local offices told the provider, sorry, we can't get involved in what they called private contracts. So with every door at the local level slammed shut, there was really only one option left, a direct appeal to the very top, the CEO of Community Living BC, or CLBC.
Okay, so to really get what's going on here, you have to understand the system itself. On paper, it's this 3-tier structure that's designed to deliver care. But as you're about to see, the gaps between these tiers, well, that's where the whole thing starts to fall apart.
So here's how it's supposed to work. At the very top, you've got CLBC. They're the provincial agency that holds the purse strings and sets policy. Then they contract out to different agencies. And those agencies are the ones who contract with the home providers, the self-employed folks on the ground doing the actual 24/7 work. And right there, that's the critical flaw. There is no direct contractual link between the government funder and the person on the front line. And this is exactly where the system starts to go off the rails. The provider's letter points out that these agencies insert all kinds of additional requirements into their contracts. These are things that are not in the official CLBC policies. They're extra conditions that pile on huge financial and personal burdens.
So what are these add-ons? Well, get ready for this. We're talking about needing over $2 million in commercial liability insurance, being forced to buy WorkSafe BC coverage, getting wildly overestimated auto insurance, paying out of pocket for extra training that the agency demands, not CLBC, and it gets more personal. You can be banned from moving house or even hiring your own help without the agency's permission. But this last one, this is the kicker. Some contracts actually give the agency the right to use the provider's private home for emergency situations with no extra pay.
So, facing this impossible situation, the provider sat down and on March 6th sent that detailed letter we've been talking about. And this wasn't just an angry complaint. It was a careful, methodical breakdown of what they saw as a complete systemic failure. Let's look at the key arguments.
The letter really zeroes in on this massive power imbalance. With all these extra agency-specific rules piled on top of the official ones, the provider becomes, in the letter's own words, absolutely dependent on the agency holding the contract.
But here's the thing. It is a completely one-way street. The provider has a mountain of obligations, but the letter points out that the agency contracts have almost nothing to say about the agency's responsibilities in a crisis. What happens if there's a fire, a flood? What if the provider themselves ends up in the hospital or, heaven forbid, dies? The contracts? They're totally silent. And this leads to what the letter calls a limbo situation. It's a terrifying question. What happens when the agency contract is over, but the vulnerable person is still living in your home? Suddenly, you're left with all the responsibility, but you have no contract, no payment, and absolutely zero legal protection. You're just stuck.
Okay, so let's recap. We have a provider on the verge of bankruptcy, still providing care, who sends a multi-page detailed analysis of systemic flaws straight to the head of the whole system. So what kind of response does an urgent high-stakes appeal like this get?
Honestly, this slide says everything you need to know. On the left, you see the thoughtful, detailed, multi-page letter. And on the right, that's the entire official response that was received. The difference is just staggering.
The response was a completely generic automated email from CLBC Info. I'm sure you've all gotten one just like it. It's that standard, "Thank you for your message. We will get back to you within 2 business days."
And after that auto reply? Crickets. Absolute silence. There was no real response to the detailed analysis. No answers to the 8 specific questions the provider asked. Just nothing from CLBC leadership.
You know, in a situation like this, the lack of a response is a response. And what it reveals is a perfectly closed loop in the system, one designed to send you right back to where you started, with no answers and no help.
Just think for a minute about the crucial questions that were completely ignored. The first big one was basically asking, is a fair contract even possible? Is there any agency out there in the Lower Mainland whose contract doesn't pile on a bunch of extra costs and requirements that go way beyond what CLBC itself asks for?
And the second one, wow, this one gets right to the heart of accountability. It asks, does CLBC even consider the person living in my home to be someone who is actually receiving services through CLBC? In other words, when the whole system breaks down, who is ultimately responsible for this vulnerable person? That question was met with total silence. And the real kicker, the final absurd irony here, is that the only piece of actual advice in that entire automated response was, please contact your local CLBC office. The very same offices that started this whole thing by saying they couldn't intervene in private contracts. It's a perfect circle, a bureaucratic loop with no exit.
And that leaves us here with one final unavoidable question. If a provider does everything right, documents the systemic failures, writes a detailed, reasoned appeal to the highest authority in the system, and all they get back is an automated email and silence, what path is left? Is the only option remaining to take the fight for accountability to the courts?